It's 2 o'clock. Happy Easter, everybody. Today I'm going to give a presentation on the steps method. If you have any questions, you can post them in the chat. This is a presentation that I originally gave in 2019 for the US Chess Federation in Orlando at the US Nationals. And there has been a lot of requests by people to get the presentation after my Perpetual Chess podcast interview, number 142. And I thought that I would do it again because it's not on YouTube at the moment, it's only a printed presentation. And I was on the Perpetual Chess podcast last Tuesday, and again there were a lot of questions about the steps method. So actually I started to train together with one of the creators of the step method, Brunia, during my studies in operations research, which was in 1992 to 1986 in Rotterdam. Currently I'm living in Florida. I've wrote 6 Chessable courses. So Duo of Explosive Italian is one. I also write for New in Chess. I give students chess lessons, so I'm a chess teacher. And I have 2 daughters who used to play chess but now are working and no longer play chess. If you have any questions, then please post them in the chat and I will answer them. So the step method. Was developed in 1987. So I was just explaining, I was doing my master's in operations research from 92 to 96, working together with Brunia, and he was already at that moment, of course, working on the method together with Cor van Wijgerden. Brunia was a person who was working with highly gifted children, so he had a didactic background, and he unfortunately died in 2005, way too early. And so with his background, it is not a coincidence that the development of the child is central in the method. So in total there are 26 workbooks and 6 trainer manuals. So the 6 trainer manuals go from step 1 to step 6. Each manual is on a 5 format and between 200 and 250 pages. The 26 workbooks, the basis plus extra and mixed books. They are all books with about 50 pages and 12 diagrams on each page for the students. And so if you look to step 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, they all have the basis plus extra and mix. And step 2 and 3 have a thinking ahead, which focuses on visualization and board vision. And there are also stepping stones books, which are specifically made for younger children in the age category of 6 to 9. And thank you, David and Samuel, for joining. So the trainer manual, which is on a 5 format, they are scripted lessons, and that makes it easy also for teachers who are not familiar with chess, and for trainers, for chess players who are not familiar with teaching, to use this method. So I was discussing Brunia, and he was a great guy, and I worked with him at SO81 Rotterdam Chess Club. And he worked together with Cor van Wijgerden. So he was the former national coach of the Netherlands, and he is still maintaining the step method. He lives in the Netherlands. He's an international master and also the trainer of Luc van Wely, Erwin Lamy, and many others. And the method was originally adopted by the Royal Dutch Chess Federation, and after that it has been adopted across the world. So in many other countries like Turkey and Germany and also in the States. So there are 3 parts: the chess curriculum in the step method. Then of course there's a trainer and the students with behind them, the parents, because the parents play a very important role. It's important that the student plays a lot of games, and that takes a lot of time from the parents to drive them to the tournaments and support all the activities of the students. So the parents are very important in the development of chess for the child. So what are the didactic principles that were used in the step method? It follows the chess development of each child. So first, children focus on material, so they count, and they say, how much have I gained? So with the queen being 9 or 10 points, the rook 5, the bishop and the knight 3 points, and then pawns 1. So at the start they're just oriented towards getting material, and later they learn to appreciate space and time development. And it's interesting that if you look to the chess development general of each child, that you see that coming back now with the neural network engines, and especially of course AlphaZero. What AlphaZero did it was create a re-evaluation between these 3 elements: material, space and time development. And it's interesting that it's central in the chess development of a child, but it's very central in chess in general. And I think for club players it's very hard to understand if they have compensation if they sacrifice an exchange or a pawn for space and time. So it's a comprehensive chess curriculum. It covers the opening, it covers the middle game, tactics, but also the end game. Every lesson it states what the prior knowledge is that needs to be there with the student for the lesson to be properly absorbed. They're all relatively small. So in each book, and I was mentioning, there are about 250, 200 pages. There are between 10 and 15 basic lessons and 10 to 15 step plus lessons. And so in total, let's say 25 lessons in 200 to 250 pages. And it's nice because it has been scripted. You can give the lesson. There is homework in the workbooks, and then you can of course correct the homework and discuss it with the students and correct any mistakes that they have in their vision. So repetition and test are integrated, and because there's so much material, about 14,000 exercises, everyone can go at his own speed, repeat if necessary. A central part, of course, of the step method is also playing games and reviewing the games. So that's an integrated part of the curriculum. And when I was giving chess lessons in the Netherlands, normally it would be first instruction, and then they would do their homework, or they took their homework at home, and then they would play a game. So it was always, that was the club evening for children in the Netherlands. So it is planned to check and adjust. So the learning is in the instruction and the exercises. The doing is in playing games, not just the official game of chess, but there are also all kind of mini games. There are other forms. There you can have a simul, practice positions. So simul between the teacher and the students to practice certain themes. And then evaluating, analyzing the games and discussing the exercises. So here I have 2 examples of mini games. So in the first one, you can see it's just 2 kings and a few pawns, and the question is, can white win, and how does he play, and what's the most efficient way to play? And it's about how to eat the pawn as efficiently as possible. So it's not to queen the pawns, but it's how do you capture the pawn as efficient as possible. In the other second diagram, you can see the two knights, and they have to capture all the pawns of the opponent. So you learn to develop how to move your knight in step 1 efficiently. For me, if I look to the step methods, so it's first orientation, and there's a separation between learning to see and learning to think. So there's the orientation, the board vision, and that's very important. So there's a lot of time also in the first few steps to learn about what are safe squares. And that's of course also related with board vision and also to avoiding blunders later on when you start playing. So safe squares, orientation, and then learning to think. So there are many chess concepts in the step method, and the visualization and calculation. And the chess concepts are a basis for communication between the student and the teacher. So when you talk about a king's attack, immediately the student knows, okay, the riddle that goes with a king's attack is gain access, bring attackers, eliminate defenders, identify the mating pattern, and then mate. And it's like a chess reflex, because if you know these riddles, these concepts well, you don't have to think about those anymore. You can immediately incorporate them in your chess. Same, for instance, for defending. We have an acronym, PC-MIC. So you have protect, capture, move away, interpose, counterattack. So whenever you're under attack, you can look at those 5 ways of defending and see if one of these 5 ways apply to your current position. And that accelerates your search and solving strategy. So there's a lot of focus on transfer of knowledge from knowing, understanding, and then applying in the games, and then reflecting on your games. Board vision includes attacking and defending. I've already mentioned safe and unsafe squares. I've already mentioned about mate. This is in the beginning, the chaser, which is the piece that delivers the mate, the helper, which protects the chaser when he mates, and the guard who protects exit squares, flight squares for the king. So this is an example of one of the earlier steps of board vision, is step 1+. So the question is, the bishop from b1 has to go to b2 in 3 moves, but it has to do so safely. So the child has to figure out, how do I get there? So it's not a full board, but it learns the child to appreciate what are safe squares. And I think that's quite unique to this method. And it also helps the child to look at the complete board and not only a small part of the board. Okay, so this is another one. Give a safe check with white in 3 moves. So white has a bishop on a5, and he has to figure out how to check the king. And what the safe way is to get there. So those are the challenges that are in this method. Just to explain all the chess concepts, here you see a number of them, like the 3 golden rules of the opening: get your pawns developed in the center, control the center, develop all your pieces, and bring your king into safety. And of course, the intent is to do this as efficient as possible, because the one who first completes his development can start attacking. So that's part of it. And completing your development means also that your queen gets a useful square and that your rooks get connected. So in the whole step method, there's not a lot of opening theory. So it's related to these 3 golden rules and activity of your pieces. And of course, there are lessons about vulnerable points in the opening, like f2 and f7, and exploiting tactics in the opening that typically occur. In the step method, the best way to learn the opening is by discussing the games. So every student has his own opening repertoire, and the idea is that that you discuss it based on the games that the children play. Some other concepts: targets, material, king and square. So if we look to this one, so one of this exercise, so take a moment to think about it. In this exercise, of course, the question is, what are the targets? And one of the ways in the step method to find a target, a mating threat, is to do 2 moves with the same color. So when you ask the students do 2 moves with the same color to find a target square, a mating threat, they come up with queen b4 and queen c5, threatening mate on f8. They have to, of course, think about whether it's a safe square. And then, then they start to realize that actually after queen b4, it's a double attack, a twofold attack on the bishop on g4 and a mating threat on f8. So that's how the concepts are being used, and you have certain easy ways to find the square as a target. I already mentioned defense, preparatory moves. So you have the preparatory moves which come into play in the step 4: luring, chasing, targeting, clearing a line, square, elimination of defense. And then elimination of defense is then broken down in capturing, chasing away, luring away, interfering and blocking. And you see that elimination of defense is luring away and chasing away because there's kind of a movement involved, and in preparatory moves we're talking about chasing and targeting. So these are just a number of examples of the chess concepts. Just to go back what we discussed here, internalize the chess concepts that we just saw, build your reflexes because you know them, and that accelerates your search and solve strategy. So the search is the orientation and solving is the visualization and the calculation. So this is an example from step 4 for visualization and calculation. So in this position, white is to move. He has to figure out what is going on, what are the direct threats. The students will identify that bishop takes f3 is a threat here, followed by knight takes d4. And also, of course, bishop takes f3 would damage the pawn structure of white. So he has to think about how to defend. So there are the 5 ways of defending, like I mentioned: protect, which would be bishop e2. Capture, you cannot capture the bishop. Move away, so you can play knight e5, that would be moving away. Interpose is not possible because there's nothing between g4 and f3. And counterattack, so knight b5 would be a counterattack, and at that moment, of course, the calculation starts. And this is an excellent way to train visualization and calculation. And when it comes to the step method, the positional aspects are covered by 2 elements: activity and vulnerability. And I will come back on that later. So you can see both knight e5 and knight d5 are also ways to increase the activity of your own pieces. And of course, with the orientation also, for instance, in this position, you can look at unprotected pieces. So you see that f7 is unprotected, so that is, in that sense, it makes sense to play knight e5. And because it threatens to take on f7. So Anders Ericsson is well known from a deliberate practice, and I was comparing how the step method compares to deliberate practice. So you train with a coach, you have proven training techniques because these methods are being applied everywhere, and the manual is being updated. You train outside your comfort zone because you get challenges which can be very difficult. You have a learning plan with specific objectives. You have your homework, you have your games that you play. You need full attention. It's active learning. You evaluate your learning and modify your learning plan accordingly. And these concepts are kind of mental representations. That's also critical for deliberate practice. And the prior knowledge that is required is explicitly listed. So the 6 steps. So it starts from novice and it goes all the way to master level. I know that a lot of masters, like international and grandmasters, when they play a tournament, they will pick up the step 6 level manuals and do that to as kind of a warm-up for a tournament. So this is step 1. Rules of the game is in there, defending against attack, and the focus on defending is also typical for the step method. And by focusing on defending, what you're also doing is you focus on the possibilities of your opponent. So a lot of children have difficulty with and are blundering because they're focusing on their own possibilities, but not on the possibilities of their opponent. So that's a strength of the step method, that there's so much focus on defending. So there's focus already in the first step against defending against an attack, defending against mate. And so here, for instance, you see in the first diagram the rook on d2 is attacking the rook on d7, and the student has to find out how to save his rook without being mated on d1 with the back rank. And let's say in the second position, you can also see that black has a queen, but white can win by using his board vision and taking away the flight squares of the queen. So save squares, opponent's moves are very important, and that is very important to avoid blunders in the future. Step 2, positional play, activity and vulnerability. I've already mentioned those are the important things, the golden rules of the opening, double attack, pin, discovered attack. So the standard tactics. Elimination of defense is introduced with the first 3, so the 2 are still missing, but this is where it starts. Mate with a rook, mate in 2, so it becomes more difficult, and thinking ahead is created for visualization skills. Also to mention about the plus levels, what are the plus levels and what is the difference between the different steps. So the plus levels are new themes of which not enough attention was paid in the normal step because of lack of space, treatment in more depth of important themes, and themes taken from a previous step but at a higher level of difficulty. So I never skipped the plus lessons. The other books which are there are the extra books. Extra is the same as this, in terms of exercises as the basic and the plus, but it's just more exercises for students who need more exercise. They can take additional exercises from the extra books, and then the mixed books. In the mixed books you don't know what the theme is, so on one page you don't know if this is about discovered attack or a double attack or a pawn breakthrough, but you just have to solve it. And many times when someone is in step 4, I would go down to step 3 mix, because it's much more difficult if you don't know the theme of the exercise. So you step down. Yes, and you see here also in the thinking ahead, you can see there are many exercises with visualization of mate. So you see the first moves, and then the child has to visualize Queen b7, e2, what is the mate that white has after these moves, or Queen b7, knight takes f4, what is the mate? And it starts already in step 2. So let me address a few questions. The first one is from David. Should plus book come before extra book? So they have a different purpose. So plus is for me part of the standard curriculum, and extra you only do if the child needs more exercises to fully understand the step. So you can have a child can go through pawn endings and he has too many mistakes. You would like to give him more exercises before you move on, and then you go to extra and you give him additional pages from extra and you do the lesson again to make sure that he fully understands. So there's not a sequence, it's depending on the needs of the student. Chat Likens asks, do you use the workbooks during lessons, or do the kids just use the workbooks for homework? Yeah, so at the moment I am an online teacher. So I give my lecture, I discuss their games, I look at what their opening training on Chessable, and then I assign them homework. If it goes very quickly with the lecture, because they immediately understand what it's about, I might do a few exercises from the workbooks during the lesson. During my lessons that I gave in the Netherlands, you would assign it and they would start doing it during the lesson and then take the remainder home. But it was always this combination of homework, lecture and playing a game. So it was to bridge the time between the lecture and when the games were scheduled. How much homework from the workbooks do you expect students to complete on a weekly basis? Well, that depends on the ambition and the ambition of the student and the parents. So everyone has his own ambition with chess. I have students who would like to do, let's say, a page a day. But typically, if you look at most lessons, they have between 2 and 5 pages. So I assign 2 to 5 pages. But there are children who like to go faster, and they like to spend more time on chess. But it depends on what your end goal is with chess in general. Do you want to become a regional or a national champion, or are you playing just to develop your analytical skills and other cognitive abilities? So it's a very different. Or are you just playing chess because you like the game? So the speed by which you go depends on the student, his objectives, and of course the talent of the student. Step 3, the opening, vulnerability, development, completing the development, mate after gaining access, pins, so more tactics, endings, key square, square of the pawn, and double attack. And you can see here the other elements. So here, for instance, in this example that is given on this page, the student has to think about the pawn structure that is in the current position. So black is to play, and this is about pawn structures, and he has to realize that white has a backward pawn on d3, and actually white would like to get rid of his backward pawn by advancing it to d4. In order to prevent that threat of white, black should play c5 to retain the pawn on d3 and make it weak. So that's an example of pawn. Okay, step 4. So step 4, the first 3 steps are relatively easy for a lot of students, but step 4 is a real big step up. So you can see, because there's a preparatory move. So the solutions, it's not like in step 3, like it's 3 ply deep, it becomes 2 ply more deep, half moves are plies. So that makes it a big step up for a lot of students. So the first 3 are easy, but step 4 is a major step up. And you see here also, it continues with a lot of tactical elements, but also positional aspects like mini plans, weak pawns, 7th rank, endgame technique and strategy. And chat, thank you for all your questions. Continue to ask them. Chat asked, thanks. One more question and then I'll quiet down. I've put thousands of positions into Lichess studies for online lessons, but thousands more to go. It's very time consuming. Are there PGNs available? There are no PGNs available. Personally, I have digitalized the complete step method, all the basic and all the exercises and step plus lessons and the exercises from step 1 to step 5. I cannot share that because of course of copyright, and of course there is the philosophy, a lot of people would like just chess steps to be on Chessable, but the Cor van Wijgerden is against using the computer too much, and so he believes in face-to-face instruction and using the workbooks. So there are no PGNs available. I've created them for my own use, for my online teaching, and Chessify is a tool by which you can scan a diagram and you can scan with your phone. You can, and I've worked with them, and now what you can do is you can scan 12 diagrams and export them as one PGN. So that has increased the speed, and that might help you. So Chessify is a way to scan a diagram with your phone. It's very accurate, and you scan 12, you select the diagrams and you export them as a PGN, and then I import them into Chessbase. Step 5, shift of the focus from tactics to positional aspect, pawn structures, strong square, open file, 7th rank. So all related to activity and vulnerabilities. And like I said, you learn more about material versus time. So the 3 elements, material, space and time. And this is the moment that our children can absorb even more in that respect. Let me see. Attacking the king, the Greek gift to bishop takes h7, king in the middle, and how to go about opening the position and investing material to make the king in the middle. And you can see here some other elements. Those rating ranges are from the steps method page, but I think they are on the low side, or especially step 6. Step 6 is for individual study, and there are 2 books. So there's a manual and 2 books, 2600 exercises. Both books are 112 pages, and it's not these are not easy exercises. You can see which elements are here. So the first 5 steps you have the teacher and the student, and step 6 you are studying by yourself. So what makes the steps method unique? So I was already mentioning you have scripted lessons. what means that the goal is given of the lesson, the prior knowledge is made explicit, there's instruction how it should be given, there are examples, you have the search strategy for the exercises, which are actually excellent. I underappreciated the wording of the search strategy for the exercises because they're almost the core of what the step method is about, and then the workbook answers. And let me just switch quickly to another page. So, one moment. Because I've had that question before. One moment. Okay. So here you can see. This was the question at the US Chess Federation seminar. So if you go to stoppenmethode.nl, which is the Dutch website, all the solutions are there. So sometimes there are teachers who say, well, I'm missing a page in the manual, or the manual doesn't have the latest edition. But you can see here on stoppenmethode.nl, if you go to the steps, right, this is the steps, you can see there are solutions here. And for every edition, the answers are given in PDF format, and that is very handy. So I recommend for all the teachers to use this page if they want to find the latest solutions, and because this is very up to date. Okay, let me return to the presentation. One moment. So the answers are at the Stoppen method, but also in the workbook. What is helpful if you are, for instance, a school teacher? You don't have to have a lot of chess experience because all the examples are given. That makes it easy to teach step 1 or step 2. On the other hand, if you're a chess player and you're not great didactic, then you can use the manual and read the manual for your students. And they're completely tested. From the student's perspective, they can learn at his own pace. So they can do two or three pages, workbook pages each time. They learn all the necessary knowledge. And when we look at knowledge transfer, so it starts with knowledge, then the application, and it translates into skills. And that's why game and playing a game are integrated. So what is unique from novice to master, right? Step 6 is being used by international masters and grandmasters as preparation for their tournaments. I think it is definitely like 2200 USCF. On the other hand, it starts with how the pieces move and with mate. So it starts with all the basics. It's based on the development of the child and didactic principles. The separation between seeing and thinking, which I think is very important. I always, when players have difficulty finishing an exercise, finding the solution, I always start with let's be comprehensive in the orientation. And I think it also reduces the blunders if you're more complete in your orientation. The concepts, like I mentioned, space for communication, speeds up your search and solving strategy. The games as part of the curriculum, the prior knowledge, concentric learning, so you add to your prior knowledge each time, and the focus on other forms of training, so the mini games, defending, positional play, and focus on opening principles and less on opening theory. So here are a few examples of step 1, which highlight defending an opponent's move. So the first one, you see that the bishop on a6 is under attack, and the student first have to realize that his bishop is under attack and then find out that which of the letter of PC Mike he has to use to solve this, and this time it is protect, put the rook of F1 on A1. And so in the second diagram on top, so on the right side, the child has to look, do I go, I'm in check, where do I go? Do I go to F2 or do I go to H2? And what's the opponent's reply? So in one case the opponent can mate with Queen G. So in one case it's safe, in the other case it is not safe. So that's also important. In the third example, it is how do I stop the pawn from promotion on E2. And the child has to learn to give up material with rook A1, knight takes A1, and then walk to D2. And this is step 1. So those are examples of defending, considering your opponent's moves and not being focused on material alone. So I wanted to discuss a few other training resources. That was a question by Mark Miller. What else are you using besides the step method? I create Chessable mini courses. So let me go to the browser and explain what I do. If you go to Lichess and you go to the Opening Explorer, you can see here the Lichess database. And what I do is I select games, rapid, classical, across all ratings. And I make mini repertoires based on what people play on Lichess in rapid and classical, because I think that resembles more what club players will get over the board, instead of grandmaster repertoires and things like that. So my idea is not to get a winning advantage out of the opening, but to find, to get exciting, fun positions, and these mini courses that are here, like Surprise Weapon against the Sveshnikov and the Dubov Explosive Italian, the Evans Gambit and the Scotch Gambit, are all relatively small books that are based on this idea that you create mini books for club players to get fun positions and then to understand it by analyzing games between amateurs and masters, to see how masters exploit, how they continue after the opening, what the plans are after the opening, and how they exploit the mistakes of weaker players. But I use this Lichess database, I think it's billions of games now, to prioritize and select my variations. The second one I'm using is Chess Structures from Flores, which is a book on forward chess and also on Chessable, and it highlights for each opening what the typical plans are. So I can go back to the browser, I'll show you that. One moment. So if I go here to the step method, you can see I also put a number of so here we have chess structures, and if I just to show you how it is being structured. So you can see you have pawn structures which go by certain opening. And you can see the Grunfeld Center here, or the Najdorf. And so I've done, for instance, if you go to the King's Indian Defense, and let's say type 2, you can see here the introduction, and it gives you a pawn structure. It gives you a pawn structure, and then with the pawn structure, it highlights basically what white's plans are and what black's plans are. And I think that's very beneficial, in addition to the step method, to understand basically if I have a certain pawn structure, which plans go with the pawn structure and are related to this opening. Okay, let me go back to the steps presentation. Then many of my students play classical games. I would like them to play at least one classical game each week, and with COVID that was of course difficult. And Lichess 45-45 was a nice alternative. You prepare the opening in context, and there's a way when you go to so you can see here, this is a game I played in the 45-45 league. And you can see this is my chat with my opponent. But I can whisper with the command \W, and then the text turns green. And the text appears not between the two players, but only in the spectator room. And you can compare notes after the game about what you were thinking during the game and what the real evaluation is. So this is a good way, specifically if you want to focus on calculation and visualization. So I was mentioning in the presentation for the Perpetual Chess podcast that many people have difficulty with concrete calculation. So they play kind of ping pong chess or hope chess. They play a move and then they wait for the answer of the opponent, or they're very generic about their visualization and calculation. But I ask my students to be more concrete and tell them which candidate moves are you considering and what is the calculation that comes with those candidate moves. And this whisper function in Lichess 45-45 is excellent for that. For game analysis, I also developed something else, and that's instead of so I'm also a blogger on chess.com. I wrote developing new skills and habits using root cause analysis. So a lot of club players are saying they're having difficulty with converting their knowledge into skills over the board. And so I've turned the pyramid upside down, and I asked my students to say, if you would have to pick which habit or which skill did prevent you from winning this game or prevent you from having optimal play, and then let's focus on changing the habit or developing the new skill that you need to win your games. And of course, so often it is I don't understand the opening, the plan after the opening moves, or I have a difficulty with calculation and visualization. I play too much on my gut, so that happens a lot. But it can also be that people play when they're too tired, or they play, for instance, so it can be a mindset thing. So that's where habits come back, or they get into time pressure and they say that time pressure is, they don't own the time pressure, but they say it happens to them. So focus on habits and ask yourself 5 times why until you get to the root cause of which habit or skill made you lose a game. Tactics. Terry Chapman was one of the people who was also in the Perpetual Chess podcast, and he was able to start blundering less, get less into, improve his calculation by doing chess-based tactics. So chess-based tactics and CT art are, I think, two very good ways to improve your tactics. And the chess-based tactics is also very good for your calculation, because there are some more difficult exercises, and somehow I like them better than chess.com and Lichess exercises. And finally, for the endgame, 100 endgames you must know. Oops. So, one moment. So I think the endgame is very well suited for two things. First one, it practices visualization and calculation. But the second thing, and that is also for children, they have to learn how to assess trading into an endgame. And this is an example from the workbook where the student is being asked to evaluate queen e5. So white has difficulty bringing his king to f7 because of the rook on e1. So he has difficulty with gaining access with the rook being on the e file, and the question is, can you trade into a winning endgame? And so in this case, white has to assess. So the first thing is, of course, queen e5, rook takes e5, f takes e5. So not taking with the pawn, because that you have to create a passed pawn to have any chances. But then what happens, and you have to visualize that after queen e5, rook takes e5, f takes e5, g5, a takes g5, h takes g5, king takes g5, king g7. Is that winning for white, yes or no? So those are excellent visualization exercises. So it helps with calculation and visualization. Instead of saying, well, I think white has good chances to win, right? No, if you have a pawn ending, you have to know whether you're winning, yes or no. You don't have good chances. It's definitive. There are no chances anymore, and it's because you can just calculate what the outcome will be. And you see in this case also, you have to go 9 ply deep, visualize the position, and then conclude, does black have opposition, and does it matter, yes or no? So that's another additional resource that I like to use for next to the step method. For the opening, the mini courses, 10 to 15 lines, the chess structures to learn how to continue after the opening, and how pawn structures relate to plans, master against amateur model games, and then the classical games on Lichess 45-45 to practice your calculation, to prepare opening in context, game analysis using root cause, the chess-based tactics and CT arts, and then the end games to practice your visualization, calculation, and also to learn every time that you play a game, should I trade into an endgame, and how do I assess the endgame? So don't hurry going through the steps, start easy and build concepts. That's the concept base. The concepts are very crucial. Motivation of the student is crucial in analyzing the games. So you should just learn from your games. That's the central theme. And also select the right tournaments. In my case, with my daughters, we started with tournaments where they could achieve, let's say, 70%, like 5 out of 7. The winning is a very positive feedback. At the same time, there are still moments that they can learn from. So it's important to learn to love less for life. There's an appendix, and in the appendix there's a search and solving strategy, and this is basically the core of the whole step method. So positionally looking for vulnerabilities and piece activity, and increasing your activity, limiting the activity of your own pieces, of your opponent's pieces, increase, exploit vulnerabilities. And then the orientation on tactical items, so unprotected pieces, vulnerable king, pieces with limited mobility, and then the technical themes that are related to this. So when I ask my students to go through this list on the left side and to mention activity and vulnerability, the quality of that chess increases tremendously. And then the technical themes flow from their knowledge. In the end, of course, you check the calculation. Did I take the moves of my opponent properly into account? So you have to visualize, I make my move. After my move, are there any pieces hanging? Any checks? What will change in the position? Also in the step method, if a combination doesn't work, see if changing the move order will make a difference. We discussed about finding mating threads, target a square. And the step method is very explicit about what activity is. It's not only the activity of the piece, but also cooperation and what vulnerability is. Okay, let's see if there are any more questions. We have 14 people. Nicholas Robinson, at what step do you think it's appropriate to start adding in endgame training? Okay, so actually if you look to the step method itself, I think it's already, let me check, I think, yeah, so in step 1, you already, in the plus lessons, you learn about the passed pawn. So you already, it starts already with endgames. And then in step 2, you get king activity and things like that. In step 3, it goes to key squares, the basic position, and then into the rook pawn and the square of the pawn, and then it extends from there. So it goes through the whole step method. And what I just mentioned in terms of additional resources that I use, you can use them at different levels. So the 100 endgames, you must know, there are the rule of the square is there, the key squares are there. So a lot of elements from step 3, I would say, and onwards that you can use. Okay. Yes. So are there any more questions about the step method? Buddy Thompson, is the step method appropriate for adult learners, improvers? Yes, I use it for adult learners. So I have a number of adult students. And recently I tweeted, so I have 3 students and they played 13 games and together they gained 332 points, and I was kind of surprised. And I was looking for what the common theme was. So the first thing is that they were resilient. So when you look at game analysis and habits and skills, resilience is a very important factor. It often occurs that players, they can be, according to the engine, +3 or +5, but the result can change. So if you're resilient, that's very important. The second thing is they were playing a lot of classical games. They used the step method and they had a solid foundation in the opening. So solid foundation in the opening is that they had their repertoires on Chessable, small ones, and they knew what the purpose was after the opening, how to continue their game. So that's definitely also for adult improvers very useful. Yes. Can an experienced player start in later steps, or should they start at the step 1? Yeah. So one thing is, I think, you can start later, but the only thing is the concepts that I was mentioning, like target, you have square, material, king. So the concepts I was mentioning before, they build up throughout the different steps. So it's almost, you would have to do a crash course and just absorb only the chess concepts and make an overview for yourself, and then you can, in my opinion, you can go to a higher level, because they build upon each other, right? It's concentric learning, so you have prior knowledge, but the core knowledge that is required are these chess concepts. Okay, let's see. David Robertson has an additional question. Midway through step 2 now, started with step 1 books. Any expectations how long each step should take to complete in conjunction with additional resources mentioned? No, I don't. I don't. It depends on your intensity of chess training. So that's the whole issue at the moment. There are people who train 30 hours a week, and there are people who train 7 hours a week or 3 hours a week, and depending on your intensity, your speed will be different. And of course it also depends on your talent. But the idea is not to go too fast. Make sure that you have a solid foundation and then move on from there. With that, I would like to all thank you for joining. I hope it was useful for you all, and I wish you happy Easter. And thank you again for joining. Bye, everybody.